Welcome to the CELS video on blood transfusion compatibility. After watching this video, learners will be able to describe the ABO blood group system and discuss its significance in blood transfusions, describe the RH factor system and discuss its significance in blood transfusions, and finally, analyze blood transfusions to determine whether a transfusion reaction will occur. So let's start by taking a look at the ABO blood group system. Here are some typical pictures that you see in textbooks and so on of red blood cells. It shows the overall structure of the cell, that it's biconcave, round. However, it shows the cell in a fairly oversimplified way. For example, moving that off to the side, if we were to look here at the plasma membrane, it looks like it's very smooth and there's not all that much on it. Potentially what you might be picturing in your head is what you learned about in other courses or earlier in the course you're currently taking, where the plasma membrane is a phospholipid bilayer and it has this structure. You may even be picturing some of the cholesterol that's within it in order to help hold the plasma membrane stable. However, the reality of the plasma membrane is it looks something a little more like this, where you have the phospholipid bilayer and the cholesterol, but you also have a number of embedded proteins that act as channels. You have other proteins that run along the inside of the cell, giving the cell structure, proteins on the inner or outer portion, even proteins that are combined with things like carbohydrates or other lipids. In the end, the plasma membrane is much more complex than it actually looks like in the basic picture of the red blood cell that we have here. For red blood cells, some of the chemicals that are found within the membrane are important in terms of discussing blood transfusions. For example, the ABO system involves a chemical on the surface of the plasma membrane that is a glycoprotein, a carbohydrate combined with a protein. In the ABO system, if we were to look at the red blood cells, we could look at the various types of red blood cells that you could have. You could have type A blood. Type A blood has a certain structure to that glycoprotein that was mentioned. For our purposes, we'll look at that antigen A as a sphere. And so type A blood has that certain form of that glycoprotein. People then with type B blood have the same antigen but just of a different form. So if we were to look at a blood cell that had antigen of type B, it might look something like this. Again, it's not actually triangular in shape, but we're representing it as being a different form of the same antigen, a B form, that is different than antigen A. So now let's look at the blood plasma of type A and type B blood. These chemicals on the surface, these antigens, are chemicals that when put into somebody else's body during a transfusion will have a reaction based on whether that antigen is found in the recipient's body. This is the same sort of immune reaction that would occur if a bacteria or virus or something along those lines were to get into the person's body. The person's immune system would fight against that bacteria or those viruses based on the chemicals the bacteria and viruses are made of. The person's body would recognize those viruses as not being part of themselves, and then their immune cells would go into attacking those pathogens. In this case, even though it might be blood from another person, that other person's body might have different chemicals. Antigen B, for example, into an antigen A person's body. And therefore, that person's body would have a reaction to that unknown chemical. And this is because people with type A blood have A antigen on their surface of their red blood cells, but in their plasma, we would find antibodies made by the immune system against type B. So if we were to take a blood donor who has blood type B and place it into a recipient who has blood type A, the type A person's body would actually have an immune response and produce antibodies that would then attack the type B blood. The opposite is true for type B blood. They have antibodies that go against type A. So if we were to take type A blood and place it into a type B person's body, the type B person's body would have an immune response producing antibodies against type A. If we were to take a closer look at that, if we have type A blood from a donor, and we were to actually place it into a person who has type B blood, that type B blood recipient would have type A antibodies. Those antibodies would go around the person's blood and actually attach to the antigens on the A-type blood. This would cause agglutination, which is the sticking together or the clumping of blood, because the antibody, as you can see here, binds to multiple red blood cells, and ultimately those red blood cells clump together. So let's go back to the image that we were discussing of type A and B blood. because there are actually two more blood types within the ABO system. The next blood type we'll look at is type AB blood. This is the type of blood where the red blood cells actually have both antigens, A and B. Because they have both antigens on their own red blood cells, a type AB person actually produces no antibodies against type A or type B antigens. Because if they did, those antibodies would attack their own red blood cells. If they were antibodies against B, they would attack the B portion. If it was antibodies against A, it would attack the A portion. One other type of blood is type O. Type O are red blood cells that have neither the A or B antigen. I just want to pause here to remind you this doesn't mean there are not any chemicals on the surface of the red blood cell. There's just not these particular glycoproteins of the form A or B. Because type O has neither A or B on its own cells, it will recognize both A and B as intruding antigens and will produce antibodies against both A and B. So now we've looked at all the different types of blood you can have in terms of the ABO blood group system and discussed its significance in terms of blood transfusions, at least broadly. Let's take a look overall at all the different interactions that could occur. We'll start with this chart here showing normal blood. This means what normal blood would look like if we had a successful transfusion. We have on the right side the mixture of the blood such that nothing actually occurs. We have a cartoon version to the left of that. At the bottom of the chart here you can see agglutinated blood. This would be blood as it would look under a microscope if we were to actually add, let's say, type A blood to a body that was producing A antibodies. The blood would agglutinate or clump together. And so on the left side we have a cartoon picture again of what that might look like. If we move this chart off to the side, we can take an overall look at interactions between the recipient's blood and then a blood donor. So let's start with the recipient's blood. Let's look at the red blood cell antigens. As we've already mentioned, we have no antigens in type O blood, A-type antigens in type A blood, B-type antigens in B blood, and both AB antigens in type AB blood. If we were to look at the plasma antibodies, type O would produce both anti-A and anti-B, type A would produce anti-B, type B blood would produce anti-A, and type AB would produce no antibodies against either antigen. What would the reactions with donor's blood look like in this case? So let's start with the recipient's blood being type O and it having both anti-A and anti-B antibodies. If we were to donate type O to a recipient who also has type O, there would be nothing to actually react with in terms of the donor type O blood, because even though the recipient is producing anti-A and anti-B antibodies, the donor type O has no antigens on the surface in terms of type A and B. If we were to donate type A blood to a recipient who is type O, the type O recipient is producing anti-A antibodies, and so it would attack and cause agglutination against the donor type A. If we were to give donor type B blood to the type O recipient, we would again have agglutination because the type O recipient has anti-B antibodies that would go and attack and agglutinate the donor's blood. If we were to put donor type AB into the type O recipient, again because the type O recipient is producing anti-A and anti-B antibodies, it would attack and agglutinate the AB blood. We can go through each of these together, looking at the recipient's blood and then each reaction with the donor's blood. Before we do, however, I will mention that once this chart is complete, it's not something that's very useful from a memorization standpoint. It's important to go through the process of understanding why there is a reaction with the donor's blood to the recipient's blood. That way you can figure out any potential combination that you might be given. So I may even recommend pausing the video at this point and predicting the potential outcomes for the remaining spaces in this chart. So moving on to a recipient having type A blood, it will have anti-B antibodies. So type O blood will not agglutinate because there are no B antigens. Type A will function because there's no B antigens for the antibodies to attack. Donor type B blood, however, does have the B antigen, and so the anti-B antibodies will cause agglutination. The same is true of the AB blood type because there are B antigens on the surface of that blood as well as the A's. A person with type B blood receiving from a donor with type O would have no reaction because, again, the donor type O has neither A or B antigens on its surface. However, if you put an A-type blood in a B recipient, there will be agglutination because of the plasma antibodies being produced by the recipient. If you put B-type blood in a B-type person, there will be no reaction, and if you donate AB blood to a B-type recipient, then you will have agglutination because of the A antigens on the surface of that AB cell. Finally, an AB person can receive from type O because they are not producing any antibodies. They can receive from type A because, again, they're not producing any antibodies. B and AB are both successful donors to an AB person because overall the type AB recipient is not producing any antibodies. Looking at this chart, we can see that the donor type O can be accepted by all recipients. So we often hear of type O blood being the universal donor because it can donate to any other blood type. You may also hear type AB blood being referred to as the universal recipient because people with type AB blood can receive blood from any of the blood type donors. So now let's move on to the Rh factor system, and we'll discuss its significance in blood transfusions. The key here is to remember that the Rh factor system is another chemical that you find on the surface of red blood cells. Even though it's involved in blood typing, you need to think about it as a separate chemical because it is actually a protein channel found within red blood cells. So let's take a look, as we did with the ABO system. We can look at the red blood cells themselves and then the plasma for antibodies in it, like we did for the ABO system. So there are actually only two types of Rh factor cells. There are cells that are Rh positive, meaning they actually have the Rh factor as one of the antigens on their surface, and there are type Rh negative cells that do not have that chemical. So if we were to take a look at those cells, we have Rh positive with the Rh antigen present. So I have it like the ABO system represented by these circles on the surface of the cell. Not that they're actually that shape, but they're a different color because, again, it is a separate chemical from the ABO system. We then have the Rh negative that do not have the Rh antigen on their surface. Again, that's not to say they don't have other chemicals on their surface, but they don't have the Rh factor. If we were then to look at the plasma to look for antibodies, we would see that the Rh positive has no antibodies because if that plasma carried the antibodies for the Rh factor, the body would then attack its own red blood cells. In the Rh negative, because it does not have the Rh factor on the surface, we do have Rh antibodies. Because if we were to put Rh positive blood in an Rh negative person, the Rh negative person would not recognize the Rh positive and see it as some chemical belonging to something from outside the body and have an immune response to it. So, in the end, to summarize, type Rh positive blood cannot go into a type Rh negative person's body. However, type Rh negative blood can go into a type Rh positive person's body because their body will not have this Rh factor to actually have an immune response to. So now that we've taken a look at the ABO system as well as the Rh factor system, let's look at questions together where we actually analyze whether a blood transfusion can occur. You might come across questions like this. Can a person with A negative type blood donate to a person who is AB positive? Just like any class, like a math class where you would have a word problem, it is important to pause and analyze this question and pull the appropriate information out of the question. So let's start by saying, in this case, who is the recipient and who is the donor? We'll represent it in this way. A negative blood is being donated to a person with AB positive blood because the question states, can a person with A negative blood donate to a person who is AB positive? However, in our analysis of whether this can happen, try not to remember all potential combinations that could happen. An easier way to look at this is to analyze the ABO system and then separately analyze the Rh factor system, because in the end, those are two different systems made up of two different chemical groups, and so we can analyze them separately. To use an analogy to explain this process in a situation unrelated to blood type, it would be like asking if somebody has brown hair and brown eyes. In order to analyze your response, you'd have to look and see what color the person's hair is, and then separately from that, what color their eyes are. If both were actually brown, then you could respond in the positive. The answer would be yes. However, if neither are brown, or perhaps the hair is blonde and the eyes are brown, or something along those lines, the answer would be no, that the person is not brown-haired and brown-eyed. The same is the case with blood. what we can do is analyze, can A blood type be donated to AB blood type? Because the recipient has both A's and B's as antigens on the surface of the cell, they will not recognize A blood type as having some different chemical that ought not to be in their body. And so we can donate A blood type to a person with AB blood. Then we can analyze, can negative blood be donated to a positive blood type person? Recall that the Rh negative factor is that there is no Rh on the surface of that cell. And so we can donate that cell to a positive blood type person because there is no antigen on the surface of that cell for the Rh factor that the positive person will recognize and attack. So this is okay as well in terms of the donation. Because both of these can happen without a negative immune reaction, we can then answer the question that A negative blood can be donated to AB positive blood. Let's take a look at a second question. Can a person with B negative type blood receive from a person who is AB positive? Something to note here is that the wording is slightly different, and so it's important to, again, recognize the information and pull the information from the question so that you can analyze this question properly. In this case, it's not asking about can B negative blood donate, as the previous question did, but receive. And so the correct analysis would be laid out this way, that the AB positive person is donating to the B negative person. What I would recommend at this point is maybe to pause the video and go through analyzing the response to this question before proceeding. Hopefully you've taken a moment to actually try this question. Now let's go through it together and look at the ABO system and then the Rh factor system. Can AB blood be donated to a B blood person? In this case, it cannot be donated because in the B person's body, they will see the A antigen on the surface of those red blood cells and have an immune response to them. Can positive blood be donated to an Rh negative blood? Again, the answer is no, because the Rh negative person does not have the Rh factor and will see that antigen on the surface of the donated red blood cells and an immune response will occur. Both of these cannot occur, and therefore the overall situation, AB positive, cannot be donated to B negative. Let's take a look at one more question. In this case, the question is a little wordier than the previous two. However, our process for analysis is the same as the previous two questions. Take some time to read this question and pause the video and answer the question on your own to attempt it. Okay, so again, hopefully you've paused the video in order to attempt this question on your own. A person with B negative blood is in an accident and requires a blood transfusion. If the hospital has O positive type blood available, can they give it to the patient? So the patient has B negative blood, and we want to see if they can receive from the O positive type blood that is available at the hospital. So here is our setup for the analysis of the question. So analyzing this for the ABO system, O blood can be donated, if you recall, to A, B, or AB blood. It's the universal donor. And so in this case, yes, we can have O blood go into a B blood type person. If we then look at the Rh factor, can positive Rh factor go into a person who has Rh negative blood? In this case, the person who has Rh negative blood will see the Rh factor on the surface of the Rh positive person's blood and will mount an immune response to it. And so the positive cannot go into the negative. Here's a situation where even though O blood can be donated to B blood, positive cannot go into negative, and therefore, overall, O positive blood cannot be donated to B negative blood. Now that you've watched this video, you should be able to describe the ABO blood group system and discuss its significance in blood transfusions, describe the Rh factor system and discuss its significance in blood transfusions, and then analyze blood transfusions to determine whether a transfusion reaction will occur.